the ledger of suffering. They called me thorough. For 16 years, I maintained the tithe assessment records for subsector Talvis, calculating quotas, verifying planetary compliance, ensuring the Imperium received its due from 214 worlds. I processed resource extraction reports, population census data, industrial output manifests. My work fed the war machine that protected humanity from extinction. I was proud of my precision. I believed every number I recorded served the Emperor's grand design. My name is Seraph Dalton, third assessor of the Administratum, subsector archive, and I want you to understand something fundamental about complicity. I didn't just witness the machine, I oiled its gears. I made it efficient. And when I finally understood what those numbers represented, when I traced the equations back to their human cost, I discovered that suffering itself had become a resource we harvested as deliberately as promethium or ore. The question that haunts me now, from whatever darkness claims those who know too much, is this: if an empire requires the systematic torture of its own people to survive, does that empire deserve to survive at all? I reported to Archive Chamber 17 at the 4th bell each morning. The walk from my habitation block took exactly 23 minutes through corridors lit by the pale flicker of glow globes set at regulation intervals. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere, that particular flatness that comes from oxygen scrubbed through filtration systems 1,000 times. My workspace occupied a corner desk in a hall that stretched 300 meters, lined with identical terminals where 417 other assessors performed their sacred duties. The ceiling arched 40 meters overhead, reinforced with Gothic buttresses carved with the names of saints and martyrs. The temperature held steady at 18 degrees, cold enough to keep us alert, warm enough to prevent complaints that might reduce productivity. My terminal displayed planetary tithe reports in amber text against black screens. Each morning I began with sector command priority designations, working down through agricultural worlds, mining colonies, forge worlds, hive cities. The data arrived in standardized formats: population figures, resource yields, compliance ratings, infrastructure assessments. I cross-referenced current production against historical baselines, calculated percentage variations, flagged discrepancies for senior review. When worlds exceeded their quotas, I noted it for commendation. When they fell short, I processed penalty assessments according to the Lex Imperialis guidelines. Clean numbers, objective measurements, the righteousness of mathematics. Lena worked 3 desks away. We took our meals together in the refectory, ate the same gray protein paste and dehydrated vegetables everyone consumed. She processed mineral extraction data from the subsector's mining operations. Sometimes we compared figures, found satisfaction in how our datasets interlocked, how my population assessments matched her labor availability calculations. The system worked. We made it work. That was our service to the Golden Throne. The prayers came naturally. At the 6th bell we stood, recited the litany of duty in unison with the other assessors. I am the Emperor's instrument. Through my labor, his will manifests. I calculate that humanity might endure. I record that truth might be preserved. My precision serves his eternal purpose. The words felt true when I spoke them. They organized my understanding of the galaxy. Without the Imperium, humanity faced extinction from Xeno's horrors, from the corrupting touch of chaos, from the blind indifference of an uncaring universe. Someone had to make the hard calculations, ensure resources flowed to the front lines where heroes held back the darkness. We were those someones. Our work mattered. I took pride in accuracy. Supervisor Harkin commended me twice for catching data corruption that would have resulted in incorrect tithe assessments. Once I identified a clerical error that would have assessed a recently devastated world for a full tithe despite losing 70% of its population to an orc invasion. The correction saved that world from additional suffering, allowed them to rebuild. I felt good about that. I told Lena about it, and she smiled, said I exemplified what an assessor should be. Faithful, diligent, compassionate within the bounds of procedure. The inquisitorial seal appeared on my terminal 3 months into the new fiscal cycle. A priority data request. Full historical tithe records for world designation Karsk 7, with special attention to population census fluctuations over the past century. The request came with a security classification I had never encountered, marked with the symbol of the Ordo Hereticus. My clearance allowed access barely. The seal itself carried weight. When the Inquisition requested data, you provided it immediately and completely. Questions were heresy. I pulled the records. Karsk 7, an agri world in the Talvis Belt. Population approximately 42 million at last census. Primary export. Nutri, grain sufficient to feed 17 Imperial Guard regiments annually. Tithe compliance rated exemplary for 83 consecutive years. The data painted a portrait of a loyal, productive world doing its duty to the Imperium. I formatted the report according to inquisitorial specifications, prepared to transmit. Then I noticed the population graph. Standard practice required plotting demographic trends to identify potential tithe sustainability issues. Karsk 7's population showed a pattern I had never seen before. Every 11 years, like clockwork, the census reported a sudden decline of approximately 8 to 12%. Then gradual recovery over the next decade, followed by another sharp drop. The pattern repeated 6 times in the available records. 66 years of regular population loss. I checked the accompanying incident reports. The first decline coincided with a notation. Heretical cult suppression operation. Inquisitorial sanction. The second, Chaos Taint Purge Ordo Hereticus intervention. The third, Genestealer infiltration response. Xenos threat eliminated. Each population drop had a justification. Each justified intervention had saved the world from corruption or worse. The Inquisition had protected Karsk 7 6 times in 6 decades. The world should have been grateful. But the mathematical precision bothered me. 11 years. Exactly 11 years, with variance of less than 3 months. Natural threats did not operate on schedules. Heretical cults did not manifest at regular intervals like maintenance cycles. The pattern suggested something else, something my training had not prepared me to interpret. I told myself the Inquisition must have methods for predicting such outbreaks, early warning systems that allowed preemptive intervention. That explanation satisfied me, mostly. I transmitted the report and returned to my regular duties. But the graph lingered in my thoughts during the evening prayers, during my meal with Lena, during the walk back to my habitation block. I found myself calculating the human cost of those percentage drops. 8% of 40, 2 million. 3,360,000 people. Dead or disappeared, every 11 years, for 6 consecutive cycles. Nearly 20 million souls across 66 years. The numbers seemed enormous when translated from percentages to persons. But the Imperium encompassed 1 million worlds. Perhaps such costs were simply what survival required. The alternative was extinction. I repeated that thought until it dulled the edge of my discomfort. The second incident occurred 9 days later. A routine audit of industrial tithe compliance brought me to the records for Forge World Metallus Prime. The Adeptus Mechanicus installation there manufactured LAS, weapon power packs, producing 600 million units annually for the Astra Militarum. The output figures showed consistent productivity for decades, no significant variations. But the labor force data revealed something strange. Every 5 years, the workforce composition changed completely. Not gradually through attrition and replacement, but wholesale transformation. The names, the identification codes, the biometric markers, all different. As if the entire labor population of 60,000 workers vanished and 60,000 new workers appeared simultaneously. The transition reports cited productivity optimization through population renewal. Without further explanation, I requested clarification from the Forge World Liaison Office. The response arrived with a priority seal and a terse notation. Labor force composition is internal mechanicus concern. Assessment focus restricted to output metrics only. Further inquiry constitutes violation of Mars Treaty protocols. The message carried implied threat. I was overstepping my authority. I should focus on my assigned duties and leave other matters to those with appropriate jurisdiction. But I had seen the pattern now. Population discontinuities, regular intervals, bureaucratic language that obscured rather than explained. I began looking for similar patterns in other worlds' records, telling myself I was simply ensuring data integrity, that any competent assessor would verify consistency across datasets. That rationalization felt thin even as I constructed it, but I continued anyway. I found 47 worlds with similar anomalies over a 2-century period. Not all showed the same pattern, but all displayed demographic irregularities that official reports attributed to necessary interventions. Heresy purges, mutation cullings, compliance operations, loyalty assessments. The justifications varied, but the mathematical precision remained constant. Scheduled population reductions, as predictable as tithe quotas, as routine as harvest cycles. Lena noticed my distraction during our meal period. I deflected her concern, claimed I was processing a complex dataset that required additional focus. She accepted the explanation. Why would she not? We were faithful servants. We trusted the system that gave our lives purpose and meaning. But that night I lay awake in my cot, listening to the hum of ventilation systems, calculating population losses across those 47 worlds. The numbers kept expanding. Hundreds of millions, perhaps billions when extrapolated across centuries and multiple subsectors. The numbers themselves proved nothing. Each intervention had documented justification. The Imperium faced real threats. Chaos corruption spread like disease if not cauterized immediately. Genostealer cults could compromise entire populations. Heretical movements threatened to fracture humanity's unity. Perhaps the patterns simply reflected the efficiency of Imperial response systems, the machine working as designed. I wanted to believe that. I tried to believe that. But certainty had begun to crack, and once cracks formed, they widened. I made a decision that I recognize now as the moment of transformation, though I did not understand it then. I submitted a data analysis request to the Central Archive, requesting access to full investigatory reports associated with the population interventions I had identified. The request cited procedural necessity, ensuring tithe assessment accuracy required understanding demographic context. The justification was technically valid. It also constituted the first act of genuine curiosity I had performed in 16 years of faithful service. Curiosity, I now understand, is the beginning of doubt. The approval came 3 weeks later. Restricted access, viewing only, no data extraction permitted. I entered the deep archive during my assigned lunch period, descended 7 levels below the main assessment floors to the classified records vault. The air there tasted different, older, heavy with the weight of secrets preserved on parchment and data crystals. An archivist servitor verified my authorization, its augmetic eyes clicking as they scanned my credentials. The mechanical sound made me think of insect wings, dry and brittle. They led me to a reading station, a small alcove with a terminal and a single chair. The files appeared on the screen as I requested them, dense blocks of text marked with security seals and authentication codes. I began with Karsk 7, the first world that had troubled me. The inquisitorial report detailed the heretical cult that had justified the first population reduction. The cult allegedly worshipped a forbidden entity, performed rituals that threatened to tear reality. The investigation had identified 3,000 confirmed cultists and 27,000 suspected sympathizers. Then I found the annexes. The lead investigator's personal assessment, filed separately from the official report. His conclusion: insufficient evidence to confirm widespread cult activity. The rituals were likely traditional harvest festivals with symbolic elements misinterpreted by local authorities. He recommended limited enforcement action against confirmed cultists only, with monitoring of suspected sympathizers, but no mass intervention. His recommendation was dated 3 weeks before the official report. The official report ordered planetary, scale sanction, resulting in 5 million deaths. The recommendation and the sanction bore the same Inquisitor's seal. I read the investigator's report 3 times, checking for misunderstanding. The text remained clear: insufficient evidence, limited action recommended. 5 million died anyway. I cross-referenced the incident with the census data. The population drop matched exactly, 8.2%, precisely within the expected range of the 11-year cycle. My hands trembled as I requested the next file: Forge World Medalist Prime, the workforce renewal reports. Here the documentation proved more clinical, less narrative. The outgoing workforce had tested at 78% productivity efficiency, acceptable by Mechanicus standards, but below optimal. The incoming workforce, drawn from nearby hive worlds, tested at 92% efficiency. The renewal operation was described as resource optimization, with the outgoing workforce reassigned to alternative service. I found the reassignment orders in a subfolder. Destination Corp Starch Processing Facility. All 60,000 workers converted to food paste to feed other workers in other facilities. The efficiency gains justified the recycling. The numbers proved it. 92% was superior to 78%. The decision made economic sense. I left the reading station, walked to the waste reclamation facility, vomited into a disposal chute. The servitor assigned to sanitation duties showed no reaction, simply cleaned the area with mechanical precision. I returned to my workspace, sat at my terminal, stared at the amber text without processing it. The numbers I had spent 16 years recording had never been abstract. They had always represented people. I had simply refused to perform the translation. Lena asked if I was ill. I told her I had eaten something that disagreed with me. She offered sympathy, suggested I request early dismissal. I declined. Work provided structure. Structure provided the illusion of normalcy. I needed that illusion desperately because the alternative was confronting what I had discovered, and I was not ready. Not yet. That night, I dreamed of ledgers stretching infinitely in all directions, each entry a name, each name a person, each person reduced to a number I had calculated and filed away. In the dream, I tried to count them, but the numbers multiplied faster than I could process. Millions became billions. Billions became incalculable. I woke gasping, my habitation blocks recycled air suddenly thick and suffocating. I continued my research. I told myself I needed to understand the full context before reaching conclusions. In truth, I was hoping to find exculpatory information, some explanation that would restore my certainty. I found patterns instead, dozens of patterns, hundreds. The more I looked, the more I saw, until the architecture of systematic destruction revealed itself in crystalline clarity. The tithe worlds showed scheduled population reductions that coincided with political stability assessments. Worlds that demonstrated excessive independence or questioned imperial authority experienced heresy purges that conveniently reduced dissenting populations to manageable levels. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. The purges came after the political reports, but the execution warrants predated the investigations. Someone decided these populations would be reduced before any evidence of actual heresy materialized. The industrial worlds displayed economic rationalization, labor forces that fell below productivity. Thresholds were replaced wholesale, their biological mass recycled into resources. The calculations showed clear cost-benefit analysis. New workers cost less than retraining existing populations, and the recycling recovered significant material value. 60,000 people converted to corpse. Starch yielded approximately 48 million calories of nutritional value. The math was sound. The horror was invisible to anyone who saw people as production inputs rather than souls. The agri-worlds revealed the most disturbing pattern. Population levels were actively managed to prevent overpopulation that might lead to resource consumption exceeding production value. When census data indicated approaching surplus population, intervention orders appeared. The interventions always cited heresy or corruption or some other threat requiring purge response. But the real cause was mathematical. Too many mouths consuming too much food that should go to imperial tithe. The people were culled like livestock, and the official records framed it as necessary protection from existential threats. I found myself calculating the aggregate numbers. Across the subsector, across 2 centuries of records I could access, the systematic interventions had resulted in approximately 3 billion deaths. Not from actual heresy or corruption or Xenos infection, from administrative convenience, from economic optimization, from political management. The Imperium was not protecting these worlds. It was farming them, harvesting their populations as deliberately as it harvested their grain and ore and manufactured goods. The realization should have come as sudden shock, but it arrived instead as terrible recognition. Of course this was happening. How else could an empire encompassing 1 million worlds maintain control? How else could central authority enforce compliance across such vast distances? Fear required regular demonstration. Obedience required examples. The purges served not to eliminate actual threats, but to remind populations that their lives held no inherent value except as contributions to the greater imperial machine. The cruelty was not incidental. It was foundational. I sat at my terminal during the evening shift. Most other assessors departed, and typed a query into the central database. The words felt dangerous. Doctrine of Necessary Suffering. The search returned a single result, classified above my clearance level, but the summary text was visible. Philosophical framework for maintaining imperial cohesion through calculated application of fear and loss. Essential reading for senior administrative personnel. Authorization. Inquisitorial Conclave, Council of Terra. There was a name for it, an official doctrine. This was not corruption or failure or bureaucratic error. This was deliberate policy. Established at the highest levels of imperial authority, taught to those who needed to understand and implement it. The system I served, that I had believed protected humanity, was designed from its foundation to inflict suffering on its own people. Not as side effect or necessary evil, but as primary mechanism of control. I accessed my personal files, retrieved my complete work history. 16 years of tithe assessments. I calculated how many of my reports had fed into intervention decisions, how many population reductions I had justified through my meticulous accuracy, how many millions of deaths I had enabled by ensuring the administrative machinery functioned smoothly. The number came to approximately 47 million people across 136 worlds. My precision had killed them. My faithful service had made me an architect of genocide. Lena found me at my terminal 3 hours past shift end. She touched my shoulder. Concerned, I turned to look at her, and I think she saw something in my expression that frightened her because she stepped back. I asked her a question I should not have asked. Do you ever wonder if the people we process reports for are actually guilty? She flinched as if I had struck her. That is not our concern, she said, voice tight. We assess data. Others make judgments. That is the proper order. She left quickly. I had revealed my doubt, and doubt was contagion. The summons arrived the next morning. Supervisor Harkin requested my presence in his office immediately. My security credentials had flagged my database queries and archive access patterns. 16 years of perfect service. And now I had drawn attention. I considered refusing, considered running, considered a dozen futile options. Instead, I walked to his office, climbed 3 levels, presented myself at his door. He sat behind a desk cluttered with data, slates and parchment reports. His face drawn with exhaustion I had never noticed before. He gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. He studied me for long minutes, his augmetic left eye wearing as it focused. Finally he spoke, voice rough from decades of recycled air. You have been accessing classified records. You have been querying restricted doctrine. You have been calculating things that are not your concern. Why? I told him the truth. I wanted to understand what my work served. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply. When he opened them again, I saw something I had not expected: recognition, understanding, sorrow. I have held this position for 43 years, he said. I discovered what you discovered in my 7th year. I have lived with that knowledge for 36 years since. His hands, calloused from endless data, slate manipulation, trembled slightly. You want me to tell you it is not true. You want me to provide context that makes it acceptable. I cannot do that. Then tell me why, I said. Tell me why we do this. He stood, walked to his window, overlooking the assessment floor, where hundreds of my colleagues labored in ignorant faith. The Imperium encompasses 1 million worlds, perhaps more. No one knows the true count. Those worlds are connected by the warp, that terrible ocean of madness and horror that our ships must traverse. Physical distance is meaningless when travel requires sailing through literal hell. What holds this empire together? Not love, not shared culture, not prosperity, fear, only fear. The populations must believe absolutely that disobedience results in annihilation. They must see regular demonstrations of imperial power, must witness what happens to those who drift toward independence or question or simply become inconvenient. So we murder them, I said. So we select them, he corrected, carefully, strategically, not randomly, but with precision designed to maximize control while minimizing actual disruption to productivity. The purges target specific populations at specific times for specific purposes. It is not madness. It is engineering. Social engineering performed across galactic scale. That makes it worse, I said. He nodded slowly. Yes, it does. Random cruelty would be merely evil. This is systematic, calculated, optimized. We have built an empire that requires the regular sacrifice of its own people to maintain cohesion. We have created a machine that runs on suffering, and we have made that suffering so routine, so bureaucratic, so normal that millions of faithful servants like yourself and Lena and everyone on that floor process the data without ever questioning what it represents. You could stop it, I said. You could refuse. His laugh was bitter hollow. I could refuse. Then they would replace me with someone who would not refuse. Someone less competent, less careful, less thoughtful about which populations to select. My refusal would change nothing except to ensure someone crueler occupied this position. I have asked myself every day for 36 years whether my participation makes me complicit or whether my refusal would simply make things worse. I still do not know the answer. That is cowardice, I said. Yes, he agreed. It is. But it is practical cowardice. Cowardice that has perhaps spared some populations by ensuring the selections are made with at least some consideration rather than pure malice. I do not sleep well, Seraph. I have not slept well in decades. But I sleep better than if I walked away and left this work to someone who enjoyed it. I stared at him, this tired man who had carried impossible knowledge for longer than I had served. The doctrine has a name. The Necessity of Darkness. Who wrote it? The inquisitorial conclave 3,000 years ago, during the age of apostasy. They realized that the Imperium had grown too large to govern through traditional authority. The emperor was silent on the golden throne. The high lords schemed against each other. The only force that could unify a million worlds was existential terror. So they formalized it, wrote guidelines, established procedures. They reasoned that humanity faced real threats from chaos, from xenos, from internal dissolution. Better to inflict suffering deliberately and survive than to show mercy and watch everything collapse into civil war or worse. The logic is almost defensible. Almost, but not quite, I said. But not quite, he agreed. Because the question remains, if our survival requires us to become monsters, are we worth surviving? If humanity's continuation demands we regularly butcher millions of our own people, have we already lost what makes us human? I have wrestled with that question for 36 years. I have never found an answer that lets me sleep soundly. I asked the question that mattered most. What happens to me now? He returned to his desk, pulled a data slate from a drawer. The screen showed my file, my record, my entire existence reduced to text and statistics. You have two choices. The first, you accept what you have learned and continue your service. You become what I am. You process the reports knowing exactly what they mean, and you live with that knowledge. You make the calculations that kill millions, and you do it with the precision that makes you valuable. You preserve your life and your position by accepting complicity. And the second choice, you refuse. You attempt to expose this. You try to warn others or resist or flee. Then you are declared rogue. Your name is added to the enforcement lists. Within 3 days you are eliminated, and another assessor takes your terminal. Your death changes nothing except to reinforce the lesson that curiosity leads to erasure. Those are not choices, I said. Those are different kinds of death. Yes, he said. Welcome to the truth of Imperial service. We all die. The only question is whether we die complicit or defiant, and whether our manner of death serves any purpose beyond satisfying our conscience. I thought of the 47 million deaths I had enabled. I thought of Lena at her desk, faithfully processing data without questioning. I thought of the 417 assessors on the floor below, all serving the machine that ground up populations like grain in a mill. I thought of my 16 years of pride in precision, of satisfaction in accuracy, of belief that my work mattered. All of it built on systematic murder, all of it designed to make me complicit without my knowledge or consent. There is a third choice, I said. He looked at me with tired eyes. What choice is that? I can refuse complicity and accept the consequence. I can die defiant, but die knowing I did not continue to serve the machine once I understood its nature. That may change nothing in the system, but it preserves something in me. He set down the data slate, closed his eyes again. When he opened them, something in his expression had shifted. Respect, perhaps, or envy. If you choose that path, you will be declared rogue within hours of leaving this office. The enforcers will come for you. They will not be gentle. Your death will be used as an example to others who might question. I understand. Your family will be interrogated. Your friends. Everyone you have ever known. They will suffer because of your choice. I have no family. Few friends. Lena will grieve briefly, then return to her work. That is the nature of our lives here. We are replaceable. He stood slowly, walked to me, extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm despite the trembling. I have waited 36 years for someone to make your choice, he said quietly. I have lacked the courage. Perhaps your defiance will plant seeds. Perhaps not. But you will die as yourself, and that is worth something. I left his office, returned to the assessment floor, sat at my terminal one final time. I accessed my personal files, began composing a document. Not a manifesto, not a call to resistance, simply a record. An explanation for anyone who might find it and wonder. I detailed what I had discovered, the patterns I had identified, the doctrine I had learned existed. I explained my calculations, showed my work, provided citations. I wrote it in the dry, precise language of assessment reports because that was the language I knew best. I made it factual, unemotional, irrefutable. Lena approached as I worked. She looked frightened. What are you doing? Leaving a record, I said, so that someday, someone might understand. They will kill you for this. Yes. Then stop, please. Come back to the work. Forget what you learned. We can continue as we were. I looked at her, this friend who had shared meals and conversation and 16 years of faithful service beside me. Can we? Can you forget once you know? Can you process reports on populations, knowing those numbers represent people, being selected for systematic slaughter? Can you calculate tithe quotas knowing you are enabling murder? Her face crumpled. Tears began to fall, and I realized she had known. Perhaps not the details, but the essential truth. She had sensed it, felt it, and had chosen to look away because the alternative was unbearable. That was the genius of the system. It made looking away easier than looking directly. It made complicity more comfortable than defiance. I am sorry, I said. I did not mean to force this on you. You are going to die, she said. Yes, but as myself. She fled. I continued writing. The document grew to 40 pages. Comprehensive, detailed, damning. I saved it to the central archive with public access permissions, knowing it would be found and deleted within hours, but hoping some fragment might survive, might be copied, might reach someone who could use it. Hope was futile, but it was all I had left. The enforcers came at the 9th bell. 4 of them, armored, carrying shock mauls and restraint tools. They surrounded my terminal. The lead enforcer, a woman with a face like carved stone. Read the charges: heresy, sedition, unauthorized access to classified materials, attempting to undermine Imperial morale. Each charge carried the death sentence. Collectively, they ensured I would receive no trial, no appeal, no mercy. I stood without resistance, let them bind my hands. The other assessors watched in silence as I was led away. I saw their faces: fear, confusion, relief that the enforcers had come for me and not for them. Lena was not at her desk. I hoped she had fled, that she might escape the interrogation that would surely follow. But I knew better. The system was thorough. Everyone I knew would face questions. My defiance would contaminate them by association. They took me to a detention facility 3 levels below the archive. The cell was small, cold, empty except for a waste chute and a sleeping pallet. They left me there for 2 days without food or water. On the 3rd day, an inquisitor came. Not the one whose seal I had seen on the reports. Someone different. Someone older. She wore the insignia of the Ordo Hereticus, and her augmetic eyes glowed with pale blue light. She sat across from me in the interrogation chamber. Between us, a table scarred with burn marks and chemical stains. She studied me for long minutes before speaking. Do you understand what you have done? I have refused to serve a system built on systematic murder of innocent populations. Those populations are not innocent. They are weak links. Points of potential failure. The Imperium cannot afford weakness. Chaos waits for any opening, any crack in the armor. We cauterize potential infections before they spread. That is rationalization, I said. You kill millions to prevent hypothetical threats. You have built a doctrine that justifies any atrocity through appeal to necessity. But necessity is defined by you. You decide who dies. You profit from the fear their deaths create. She smiled, thin and cold. You speak as if you understand the stakes. You processed numbers in an office. I have walked through chaos, corrupted worlds where reality itself tears apart. I have seen what happens when heresy spreads unchecked. Entire populations transformed into writhing nightmare flesh. Children born with eyes that see into the warp. I have mercy, killed worlds to spare them worse fates. Do not lecture me on necessity when you have never witnessed the alternative. And Karsk 7? I asked. That investigator found no evidence of cult activity, no heresy, no corruption. Yet 5 million died. Explain the necessity there. Her smile faded. Karsk 7 showed signs of independence. Local governance had begun questioning tithe assessments. The population had begun to believe they could negotiate with imperial authority. That belief is cancer. It spreads. Other worlds see successful resistance. They attempt the same. The whole structure fractures. Better to crush one world's aspirations than fight 17 rebellions across the subsector. That is necessity. That is tyranny, I said. Tyranny is survival, she replied. Democracy is a luxury humanity lost when it spread to the stars. When populations number in the trillions and distances span light, years and horrors beyond comprehension assault us from the warp and the void, gentle governance becomes suicide. You want compassion. Compassion dies screaming when chaos daemons tear children apart before their parents' eyes. You want freedom. Freedom invites the Xenos to exterminate entire species. The Imperium is harsh because the galaxy is harsh. We adapt or we die. And if adapting requires us to become what we fight against. If our survival demands we embrace cruelty as foundational principle, she leaned forward. Then we embrace it. We become monsters so humanity can sleep soundly. We bear the burden of necessary evil so that billions can live in ignorance of what their survival costs. That is our sacrifice. That is our duty. I do not expect you to understand. You are not strong enough. No, I said. I am not strong enough to murder millions and call it duty. I am not strong enough to rationalize genocide as policy. I am not strong enough to sleep soundly knowing I have made myself into precisely what I claim to fight against. You are right. I lack that strength. She stood. You will be executed at dawn. Your body will be processed for protein reclamation. Your name will be erased from all records. In 3 days no one will remember you existed. Your defiance changes nothing. Perhaps, I said. But I will die as myself, not as what you tried to make me. She paused at the door, looked back. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in those augmetic eyes. Recognition. Regret. Some ghost of the human she had been before centuries of service had ground her down into an instrument of doctrine. Then duty reasserted itself, the mask returned, and she departed without another word. They came for me at dawn. 4 guards. The walk to the execution chamber took 5 minutes through corridors carved with litanies, praising the Emperor's mercy. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Almost. The chamber held a single chair, restraints, and a servitor fitted with execution equipment. An efficient design. No ceremony, no witnesses. Just mechanical administration of death. I did not resist as they secured me, did not beg or plead or recant. I had made my choice. The cost was acceptable if the alternative was continued complicity. The servitor approached, its augmetic systems clicking and whirring. I closed my eyes. Thought of the 47 million deaths I had enabled when I believed I served a righteous cause. Thought of the billions more that had died across centuries of systematic slaughter. Thought of the machine I had helped oil, the engine of suffering I had made efficient through my precision and faith. The Imperium required suffering. It harvested pain as deliberately as it harvested grain. It had built entire systems to ensure populations experienced regular trauma, systematic loss, demonstration of their powerlessness. And it worked. Fear maintained control. Cruelty prevented rebellion. The machine functioned exactly as designed, and functionaries like myself kept it running smoothly through our ignorant service. But suffering on that scale, across 1 million worlds, sustained for 10,000 years, concentrated through the warp itself into pure emotional agony, what would that create? What entity might coalesce from such focused, deliberate torture? What new god might be birthed from humanity's collective scream? The priests taught that the Emperor protected us from chaos. But what if we had already created our own horror? What if 10 millennia of systematic suffering had given birth to something in the warp? Something that fed on despair and powerlessness and the specific flavor of pain that comes from betrayal by those who claim to protect you. I opened my eyes, looked at the servitor. If you can still hear me, somewhere inside that machine, know that you were human once. Know that what was done to you was done to millions. Know that your suffering matters, even if the Imperium says it does not. The servitor hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, its augmetic system stuttered. Some fragment of the person it had been recognized my words. Then programming reasserted control, and it continued its approach. But I had seen the flicker. Proof that even the most thoroughly processed, the most completely transformed, retained some ember of what they had been. The execution was quick, painless in its way. A neural scrambler that simply switched off consciousness like extinguishing a candle. I felt a moment of vertigo, of falling, of dissolving, then nothing. But I am speaking to you now, you who read this, you who found this testimony buried in some forgotten archive or recovered from corrupted data. I am dead. I have been dead for however long it has been since that morning in the execution chamber. Yet I speak because someone preserved my words. Someone copied my document before it could be erased. Someone believed my testimony mattered. I cannot know who you are or when you read this. Perhaps you are an assessor like I was, beginning to notice the patterns I noticed. Perhaps you are an inquisitor questioning the doctrine you serve. Perhaps you are a simple citizen wondering why the Imperium demands so much suffering for so little mercy. Whoever you are, understand this. The system is not broken. It is not corrupted. It is not failing. It is working exactly as designed. The cruelty is not incidental. It is structural. It is essential. It is the engine upon which the entire edifice of imperial authority rests. And that engine has been running for 10,000 years. Calculate that suffering. 1 million worlds. Average population perhaps 20 billion each, though many have far more. That is 20 quadrillion souls living under imperial authority. Of those, if even 1% experience systematic trauma, persecution, purging, or administrative violence across a given century, that is 200 trillion incidents of suffering. Multiply across 100 centuries. 20 quintillion individual moments of agony, terror, loss, despair. 20 quintillion prayers screaming into the warp, begging for mercy that never comes, raging against injustice that is policy, mourning loved ones sacrificed for necessity that is lie. What God could such concentrated anguish create? The ruinous powers were born from emotion given form in the warp, corn from rage and bloodlust, Nurgle from despair and acceptance of decay, Tiench from ambition and scheming, Slainish from excess and sensation. But what of suffering without purpose? What of pain inflicted by those who claim to be saviors? What of the specific horror of betrayal by authority, the unique agony of being sacrificed by the very system that promises protection? I have had time to think about this. Time beyond time, in whatever space the dead occupy, when their testimony continues. I have contemplated the possibility that we, the Imperium, have been feeding something in the warp for 10 millennia. Something that grows stronger with each purge, each culling, each population rendered into corpse, starch, or burned for administrative convenience. Something that embodies not the chaos of the four ruinous powers, but the cold, systematic cruelty of imposed order. The tyranny of necessity, the violence of protection, the horror of salvation that requires regular human sacrifice. If such an entity exists, it would be our perfect reflection, born from our methods, sustained by our doctrine, a god of suffering imposed from above, of pain inflicted by authority, of agony disguised as duty. It would feed on every execution justified by necessity, every purge rationalized as preventing worse outcomes, every population cold in the name of imperial stability, and we would feed it willingly, continuously, systematically, because we have convinced ourselves that cruelty is survival and mercy is extinction. The Inquisitor who condemned me believed she fought chaos. But what if the greatest corruption was not external, but internal? What if we had become so focused on external threats that we failed to notice the horror we were cultivating within our own systems? What if the Emperor, silent on the golden throne, could see what we had become and despaired that his dream of human unity had transformed into a machine that grinds up billions of souls to maintain its own existence? These are the questions I died with. These are the thoughts that persist beyond death. I do not offer you answers because I have none. I offer only my testimony. I served faithfully for 16 years before discovering what my service enabled. I processed data that facilitated the deaths of 47 million people. I did this believing I protected humanity. I was wrong. Not wrong that threats exist. Those are real. Wrong that our response to those threats must be systematic butchery of our own populations. Wrong that fear is the only force capable of unifying humanity. Wrong that we must become monsters to fight monsters. There are choices even within tyranny. Supervisor Harkin made his choice to continue serving in hopes that his competence might spare some populations from worse cruelty. The Inquisitor made her choice to embrace necessary evil and bear its weight. Lena made her choice to look away and preserve her faith. I made mine to refuse complicity once I understood the system's true nature. None of these choices were good. The Imperium does not offer good choices. It offers different kinds of compromise, different flavors of complicity, different paths to damnation. But some compromises preserve more of your humanity than others. Some deaths are cleaner than others. Some defiances matter even if they change nothing about the system. I died defiant. That is worth something, even if only to me. I refused to continue oiling the machine once I understood what it ground up. I chose erasure over participation. That choice altered nothing in the grand architecture of imperial suffering. The assessments continue. The purges continue. The populations are still selected, still culled, still processed into resources. My death proved nothing except that I retained enough conscience to reject what conscience demanded I reject. But perhaps my testimony reaches you, and perhaps you, too, begin to notice patterns. Perhaps you begin to calculate the aggregate cost. Perhaps you realize that the numbers you process or the orders you follow or the policies you implement serve not humanity's protection, but humanity's systematic traumatization. Perhaps you face the same choice I faced: complicity or defiance, survival or integrity, pragmatic evil or futile resistance. If that moment comes, remember this: the Imperium tells you there are no alternatives. It tells you that, without harsh control, humanity fractures and dies. It tells you that mercy is weakness and compassion is luxury and kindness is suicide. It tells you these things so thoroughly, so constantly, so convincingly that they feel like truth. But they are not truth. They are policy. Policy that serves those in power, that maintains the hierarchies, that ensures the machine continues running, even as it consumes everything we claim to protect. The alternative to systematic cruelty is not naive pacifism. It is not pretending threats do not exist. It is recognizing that our response to threats has become worse than the threats themselves. It is admitting that an empire built on fear and maintained through regular sacrifice of its own people has already lost what makes it worth preserving. It is choosing to stop, to refuse, to say that some costs are too high even for survival. I cannot tell you what to do. I can only tell you what I did and why. I refused. I stopped. I chose death over continued participation. That may have been foolish. That may have been naive. That may have changed nothing. But it preserved something in me that complicity would have destroyed. Some core of self that recognized horror and refused to pretend it was necessity. The Imperium will continue without me. It will continue without you if you make the same choice. The machine is vast beyond comprehension, and individual defiance is less than dust in the cosmic scope of its operations. But you are not the machine. You are a person. You have conscience. You have choice. You can recognize evil even when it wears the mask of necessity. You can refuse even when refusal is futile. You can die as yourself rather than live as what the system requires. These are small victories. Meaningless victories, perhaps. But they are yours, and in an empire that denies you almost everything, they are worth claiming. I am dead now. I have been dead for however long since that morning in the execution chamber. My body was processed into protein paste. My name was erased from the records. My friends were interrogated and found clean of sedition. My supervisor continued his exhausted service. The assessments continued. The purges continued. The suffering continued. Nothing changed except that one person refused to participate once they understood what participation meant. But my testimony survived. Someone preserved it. Someone knew. Someone believed these words mattered enough to copy them, hide them, pass them forward. Perhaps that is the only resistance possible in an empire this vast and terrible's small acts of preservation, fragments of truth hidden in archives, testimony smuggled across centuries. Not enough to topple the machine, but enough to remind those who find it that the machine is not inevitable, not righteous, not justified despite its claims. The question I posed at the beginning remains: if an empire requires the systematic torture of its own people to survive, does that empire deserve to survive? I cannot answer for you. I can only say that I decided it did not, and that decision cost me everything, and I do not regret it. I died knowing what I was and what I refused to become. That clarity is worth the price. If you are reading this in some future age, perhaps the Imperium has changed. Perhaps someone, somewhere, found a way to break the cycle of systematic suffering. Perhaps mercy found its way back into the machine. Perhaps humanity learned to unify through something other than fear. I hope so, though I do not believe it. The machine has momentum. It has doctrine. It has true believers like I once was, and exhausted pragmatists like Harkin, and committed servants like the Inquisitor, all of whom keep it running even as it destroys them. But hope, however futile, is also choice. and choice is all we have. My name was Seraph Dalton. I served as third assessor of the Administratum subsector archive for 16 years. I processed tithe reports and population assessments and contributed to the deaths of 47 million people before I understood what my precision enabled. I discovered that the Imperium is not corrupted, but functioning exactly as designed, that its cruelty is not failure, but policy, that its suffering is not incidental, but essential. I refused to continue serving that system. Once I understood its nature, I died for that refusal. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is my small act of defiance against an empire that demands absolute obedience and punishes questions with erasure. I do not know if it matters. I do not know if you can use it. I know only that I had to speak, had to record, had to leave some mark that I existed and understood and chose conscience over survival. The Imperium harvests suffering. It has done so for 10,000 years. And somewhere in the warp, fed by quintillions of individual agonies, something may be stirring. Some new power born not from the four ruinous powers, but from our own systematic cruelty. A God of imposed suffering, of authoritarian violence, of salvation that requires endless sacrifice. We created it. We feed it. We worship it without knowing its name, and we call it necessary. That is the greatest horror, not that we inflict such suffering, but that we have convinced ourselves it is required. Not that we kill millions, but that we have built philosophies to justify it. Not that we have become monsters, but that we believe ourselves righteous monsters. Necessary monsters, tragic heroes bearing unbearable burdens for the sake of humanity's survival. We are not heroes. We are the threat. We have spent 10 millennia fighting external darkness while cultivating internal horror. And if we have birthed a new God from that horror, we have only ourselves to blame. This is where my testimony ends. This is where I fell silent, executed and processed and erased. But my words survived, hidden by someone with conscience, preserved by someone who believed truth mattered, even when futile. Perhaps you will hide them again. Perhaps you will pass them forward. Perhaps you will simply delete them and return to your duties, choosing the comfort of ignorance over the burden of knowledge. Whatever you choose, know that the choice is yours. The Imperium cannot take that from you. It can kill you for it, erase you for it, punish everyone you love for it. But it cannot prevent the choice itself. And that small sovereignty, that tiny fragment of freedom, is perhaps the last thing about us that remains truly human. I chose defiance. I have no regrets. May the Emperor, wherever he watches from the golden throne, forgive us for what we have made in his name. May he understand that some of us recognized the horror and refused to participate. May he remember that we were human once, before the machine ground us down, and that some of us fought to preserve that humanity, even when the cost was everything. May he remember us, if anyone remembers anything, when all of this finally ends. My name was Seraph Dalton. I died defiant. This is my testimony. Remember it.